My mother-in-law convinced my husband to divorce me and marry my own sister, claiming she was stronger and better. I was devastated and left to rebuild my life. Years later, at a grand party I hosted, they walked in smiling, until they saw my husband. The man whose presence turned their faces pale. Susan raised her champagne glass at our monthly family dinner and made an announcement that changed everything. "I'm so proud to welcome Margaret as my new daughter-in-law. Logan made the right choice for his future." I sat frozen as 20 family members turned to stare at me, their faces a mixture of pity and uncomfortable silence. Apparently, everyone knew about my husband's engagement to my sister except the wife he was still legally married to. The crystal champagne flute slipped from my numb fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor of Susan's dining room. The sound cut through the heavy silence that followed her words. Logan sat 3 seats away from me, his eyes fixed on his plate, unable to meet my gaze. Margaret, radiant in a navy dress I had helped her pick out last month, wore the diamond ring I now recognized as the one Logan had supposedly returned to the jeweler after deciding it wasn't quite right for me. "Susan," Uncle Robert's voice carried a warning tone as he glanced between me and the happy couple. "Perhaps this conversation should happen privately." My mother-in-law waved him off with the same dismissive gesture she used when anyone questioned her decisions. "Nonsense. Family should celebrate together. Mia understands this is what's best for everyone involved." The words seemed to come from underwater. I understood nothing. 4 hours earlier, Logan had kissed me goodbye before leaving for what he claimed was a business meeting. He had mentioned dinner at his mother's house, suggesting I arrived directly from my photography session with the Henderson family. Nothing in his behavior had suggested he was planning to end our marriage in front of 24 relatives. My throat felt constricted as I looked around the table at faces I had considered family for 4 years. My cousin Sarah avoided eye contact entirely. Logan's brother Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Even my own parents, seated near the far end of the table, wore expressions of resignation rather than shock. The realization crashed over me with devastating clarity. They all knew. Every single person in this room had been informed of this decision except me. How long? The question escaped before I could stop it, my voice barely above a whisper. Margaret reached across the table to touch Logan's hand, the gesture possessive and deliberate. "We've been talking for months, Mia. About everything. About compatibility, about goals, about what we want from life." Her voice carried the patient tone she used when explaining complex business concepts to clients she considered intellectually inferior. "Talking." I repeated the word, testing its weight. "Is that what we're calling it?" Logan finally raised his eyes to meet mine. The man who had promised to love me through better and worse, who had held me through my father's heart surgery and celebrated every small victory in my photography business, now looked at me as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a wife to be cherished. "Mia, you have to understand. This isn't about hurting you. It's about being honest about what we both need." His words carried the rehearsed quality of someone who had practiced this conversation multiple times in front of a mirror. Margaret and I share the same drive, the same ambition. We push each other to be better. The implication hung in the air like smoke. I was not someone who pushed him to be better. My photography business, which I had built from nothing through evening and weekend shoots while maintaining a full-time job to support our household, was apparently evidence of my lack of ambition. The sacrifices I had made to ensure he could pursue his MBA without financial stress were forgotten, dismissed as insufficient compared to whatever Margaret offered. Susan nodded approvingly, as if Logan had recited the correct answer to a test question. "Margaret made partner at her consulting firm this year. She's building something substantial. Success recognizes success." Her gaze swept over me with barely concealed disdain. "Some people are content with hobbies. Others build empires." The casual cruelty of reducing 4 years of marriage and my professional aspirations to a hobby struck me with physical force. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself, my knuckles white against the dark wood. Around us, dinner continued as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Forks clinked against plates, wine glasses were refilled, and quiet conversations resumed at the far end of the table. My sister's hand remained on Logan's arm, her engagement ring catching the light from the chandelier above. I recognized the setting now. It was similar to the one I had admired in a jewelry store window downtown 6 months ago, the one Logan had dismissed as too expensive and impractical. Apparently it was only impractical when intended for me. "When is the wedding?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "We haven't set a date yet," Margaret replied, her smile sharp as broken glass. "We wanted to handle the practical matters first. Logan's lawyer says the divorce can be finalized quickly if both parties are cooperative." The divorce papers that had been drawn up and filed while I was editing photos from last weekend's wedding shoot, blissfully unaware that my own marriage was being dissolved by committee. I wondered how many of these family dinners had been planning sessions, how many conversations had centered around the logistics of dismantling my life. Caroline had tried to warn me last month. My best friend had mentioned seeing Logan at an upscale restaurant during her lunch break, noting that he seemed deep in conversation with someone she couldn't identify from her distant table. When I mentioned it to Logan, he explained it as a business meeting with a potential client. Now I understood the client had been Margaret, and the business they were conducting was my replacement. The room felt impossibly small despite its generous dimensions. The faces around Susan's antique dining table blurred together as I struggled to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. My husband of 4 years had announced his engagement to my sister in front of our combined families, treating our marriage as a minor inconvenience to be addressed through proper legal channels. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. Every eye in the room focused on me, waiting to see how I would respond to this carefully orchestrated humiliation. "Congratulations," I said finally, my voice carrying across the room with surprising clarity. "I hope you'll be very happy together." The words felt foreign on my tongue, but they were the only ones that seemed appropriate for a woman who had just discovered her entire life had been reduced to a footnote in someone else's love story. I walked to my car in the cool October air, my congratulations still echoing in my mind like a cruel joke I had told at my own expense. The parking lot gravel crunched beneath my heels as I fumbled for my keys, my hands trembling with adrenaline I couldn't release. Behind me, the warm glow from Susan's dining room windows cast long shadows across the pavement, and I could hear the muffled sounds of conversation resuming inside. Life moving forward without missing a beat. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and stop signs. Our apartment felt different when I stepped inside, as if the furniture itself had been rearranged to accommodate secrets I was only now beginning to see. I sat on our couch, still wearing my good dress and heels, staring at the framed photos lining our mantelpiece. 4 years of carefully documented happiness. Our wedding day, vacation trips, holiday celebrations with both families. Every smile now felt like evidence of my own naivety. Logan's phone buzzed on the coffee table where he had left it that morning. The screen lit up with a text preview from Margaret. "Can't wait to start planning. Call me when you get home." The casual intimacy of the message, the assumption that her needs would take priority over whatever conversation he might need to have with his current wife, struck me with fresh humiliation. When Logan finally returned home 3 hours later, he found me exactly where he had left me, still staring at that phone. He moved through our space differently now, with the careful distance of someone who had already mentally packed his belongings. His eyes swept over me without the warmth I had grown accustomed to over 4 years of marriage. "We should probably talk about logistics," he said, settling into the armchair across from me instead of joining me on the couch as he would have done just that morning. The word logistics reduced our marriage to a business transaction requiring orderly dissolution. I studied his face, searching for traces of the man who had once stayed up all night helping me edit wedding photos when my computer crashed, who had surprised me with my favorite coffee every morning for 6 months after my father's heart surgery. That person seemed to have been replaced by someone who spoke in corporate terminology about the end of our shared life. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. Logan's fingers drummed against the armrest, a nervous habit he had developed during his MBA program. "It's not about planning, Mia. It's about recognizing what isn't working and having the courage to address it honestly." The response sounded rehearsed, polished smooth by repetition. I wondered how many times he had practiced that answer, perhaps with Margaret coaching him on the most diplomatic phrasing. The thought of them sitting together, strategizing the gentlest way to destroy my world, made my stomach clench. Over the following days, I began noticing patterns that had been invisible to me before. Logan's phone, once carelessly left around our apartment, now remained constantly within his reach. He carried it to the bathroom, kept it beside his plate during dinner, took it with him when he went to check the mail. The device had become an extension of himself, a lifeline to conversations I wasn't permitted to join. Margaret's calls increased in frequency, arriving at precise moments when Logan was home from work. She would phone during dinner, interrupting our increasingly strained conversations with updates about her day, her latest client success, her thoughts on current events. Logan would answer immediately, his voice warming in ways that made me feel like an intruder in my own living room. "She's just excited about the partnership opportunity with Morrison Industries," he explained after one particularly long call that had stretched through our entire meal. "You know how Margaret gets when she's working on something big." I did know how Margaret got. My sister had always possessed an intensity that attracted attention and commanded respect in professional settings. What I was beginning to understand was how that intensity had been redirected toward claiming my husband with the same methodical approach she applied to landing major accounts. Susan's visits to our apartment became more frequent as well, though her stated reasons varied from week to week. She needed to borrow a serving dish for her book club meeting. She wanted to drop off magazines she thought Logan might enjoy. She had extra produce from her grocery shopping that would spoil if she didn't share it. Each visit included subtle observations about our domestic arrangements that left me feeling scrutinized and found wanting. "You really should encourage Logan to join that executive leadership program at the university," Susan mentioned during one such visit, running her finger along our bookshelf and pausing at the photography journals mixed among Logan's business texts. "Margaret thinks it could open doors for him professionally. She has connections there, you know." The suggestion was presented as concern for Logan's career advancement, but I heard the underlying message clearly. Margaret had insights and opportunities to offer that I lacked. My role as a supportive spouse was being systematically redefined as an obstacle to his potential success. Margaret's presence in our social circle expanded as well. She began appearing at events where Logan and I had planned to spend time together, armed with legitimate reasons for her attendance that made objecting seem petty and unreasonable. When we attended his colleague's birthday party, Margaret arrived as the guest of someone she had recently started dating, though she spent most of the evening in animated conversation with Logan about industry trends I couldn't contribute to meaningfully. I watched from across the room as she leaned close to him, her hand resting briefly on his arm as she made some point that caused him to laugh with genuine delight. The sound was one I hadn't heard from him in months, and its absence from our own interactions became suddenly, painfully obvious. "Your sister certainly knows how to work a room," Logan's colleague David commented following my gaze. "She mentioned she's been helping Logan with some networking opportunities. Smart of him to leverage family connections." The casual reference to their professional collaboration was news to me. When I asked Logan about it later that evening, he dismissed my concerns with the same reasonable tone that was becoming his default response to my questions. Margaret introduced me to a few people at her firm who might be useful contacts. "It's not a secret, Mia. I assumed you understood that maintaining professional relationships requires ongoing effort." His explanation made my discomfort seem irrational, the paranoid jealousy of a wife who didn't appreciate her husband's ambition. The logic was sound enough that I began questioning my own reactions, wondering if my unease reflected personal insecurity rather than legitimate concerns about appropriate boundaries. Our evening routines changed gradually but persistently. Logan replaced our usual practice of watching movies together with educational documentaries that Margaret had recommended, programs focused on business innovation and entrepreneurial success stories. When I suggested alternating between his selections and films I might enjoy, he responded with frustration that caught me off guard. "I'm trying to expand my knowledge base, Mia. I thought you'd want to support that growth instead of pulling me back toward mindless entertainment." The accusation that I was holding him back from intellectual development stung more than his obvious preference for spending our leisure time consuming content chosen by my sister. His words carried implications about my own interests and intelligence that felt designed to create distance between us. I began staying later at the photography studio downtown, editing client sessions and organizing equipment that didn't really need organizing. The space felt safer than our apartment, where Logan's increasing detachment made me feel like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. When I finally returned home each evening, I often found him on the phone with Margaret, their voices carrying the easy intimacy of people who understood each other completely. The conversations always ended when I walked into the room, followed by Logan's explanation that they had been discussing some aspect of her consulting work that wouldn't interest me. The presumption that I lacked the capacity to engage with Margaret's professional challenges created another small wound in my already damaged confidence. Caroline noticed the changes before I was ready to acknowledge them openly. During our weekly coffee meetups, she observed that I seemed distracted, that my usual enthusiasm for upcoming photography projects had been replaced by a distracted restlessness she hadn't seen before. "Is everything okay at home?" she asked one Thursday afternoon, studying my face with the direct concern of someone who had known me since college. "You've seemed different lately." I deflected her questions with vague reassurances about work stress and seasonal changes, but Caroline's worried expression suggested she wasn't convinced by my explanations. Her intuition about relationship dynamics had always been sharper than mine, and I suspected she was seeing warning signs that I was still trying to rationalize away. The silence stretched between Caroline and me until my phone buzzed with a text from the Henderson family, canceling their afternoon portrait session due to their daughter's sudden fever. I stared at the message, feeling an unexpected wave of relief at having my evening unexpectedly freed up. Logan had mentioned working late again, which had become his default schedule over the past month, but maybe I could surprise him with dinner from Romano's, the Italian place where we had celebrated every anniversary. "I should probably head home," I told Caroline, gathering my purse and leaving money on the table for my untouched latte. "Maybe Logan and I can actually have a conversation tonight without his phone interrupting every 5 minutes." Caroline's expression remained concerned as she watched me stand. "Just remember what I said, okay? Trust your instincts. You know him better than anyone else does." The drive to Romano's took longer than expected due to construction on 5th Street, but the familiar smell of garlic and oregano when I stepped inside made the wait worthwhile. I ordered Logan's favorite chicken parmigiana and my usual shrimp scampi, along with the tiramisu we had shared on our first date. The teenage cashier smiled as she handed me the warm containers, and I felt something approaching optimism for the first time in weeks. Our apartment building's elevator was out of service again, so I climbed 4 flights of stairs with the takeout bags, already planning how I would set the dining room table with our good china and the candles we hadn't used since last Christmas. Perhaps a romantic dinner at home was exactly what we needed to remember why we had fallen in love in the first place. I fumbled for my keys at our door, balancing the food containers carefully, when I noticed something that made me pause. Logan's dress shirt lay crumpled on the hallway floor just inside the entrance, as if it had been discarded in haste. My key turned in the lock with unusual loudness, though the apartment seemed quiet beyond the soft jazz music playing from our bedroom stereo. The takeout bags slipped from my fingers and crashed to the floor as I took in the scene before me. A trail of clothing led from the living room toward our bedroom like breadcrumbs, marking a path I desperately didn't want to follow. Logan's navy tie draped across the arm of our couch. A woman's designer blouse I recognized as one Margaret had worn to Susan's birthday dinner, now lying abandoned beside our coffee table. My hands trembled as I stepped over the scattered containers of now ruined dinner, the smell of spilled marinara sauce mixing with the vanilla candle scent that had always made our home feel welcoming. Each piece of discarded clothing told part of a story I wasn't ready to accept, evidence of an intimacy that had been carved out of my marriage without my knowledge. The bedroom door stood partially ajar, and through the gap I could see movement on our bed, hear the soft murmur of voices I recognized with devastating clarity. My legs felt unsteady as I approached, my heart hammering so loudly I wondered if they could hear it over their whispered conversation. I pushed the door open. Logan and Margaret lay tangled in our wedding quilt, the one my grandmother had hand-stitched as a marriage gift, their bodies intertwined with the casual intimacy of lovers who had done this many times before. They were so absorbed in each other that my presence went unnoticed for several seconds, long enough for me to absorb every detail of their betrayal. Margaret's auburn hair spilled across Logan's chest exactly as I had imagined during all those late-night phone calls. His hands moved over her skin with a tenderness I hadn't experienced from him in months, and the expression on his face held a contentment that made my stomach turn. This wasn't the frantic passion of a single mistake. This was the comfortable intimacy of an established relationship. The takeout containers hit the hardwood floor with a crash that finally shattered their private moment. Logan's eyes flew open, meeting mine across the room with a startled panic that quickly shifted to something resembling resignation. Margaret sat up slowly, making no attempt to cover herself, her expression more irritated than ashamed at the interruption. "Don't," I said, my voice sounding foreign and hollow as Logan scrambled for the sheet. "Don't insult me by pretending this is something other than what it obviously is." Margaret reached for her phone on the nightstand with the casual confidence of someone who had been expecting this moment. "We should probably call Susan," she said to Logan, as if I weren't standing there watching my marriage dissolve in real time. "She'll want to know that everything's out in the open now." The casual reference to his mother's involvement confirmed what I had been trying not to believe. This wasn't a spontaneous affair. It was a coordinated campaign orchestrated by the people I had trusted most. Logan's face flushed with something that might have been guilt or simply embarrassment at being caught. "How long?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. 3 months, Logan admitted, unable to meet my eyes. "Officially. But we've been talking about this possibility much longer than that." Margaret swung her legs over the side of the bed, reaching for her clothes with efficient movements. "Since before Christmas, really. We both knew this marriage wasn't working, Mia. You must have sensed it too." The assertion that I must have known, that I was somehow complicit in my own betrayal, struck me with fresh cruelty. I thought about all the evenings I had waited for Logan to come home, all the dinners I had prepared that grew cold while he worked late, all the times I had convinced myself that his distance was temporary stress rather than permanent disinterest. "You were in our home," I said, focusing on Margaret as she pulled on the blouse that had been scattered in our living room. "In our bed. Using our dishes, sitting at our table, pretending to care about my life while you were planning to destroy it." Margaret's reflection met mine in our dresser mirror as she fixed her hair. "I wasn't pretending anything. I do care about you, which is why I think this is ultimately better for everyone involved. Logan needs someone who understands his ambitions. You need someone who appreciates your artistic temperament." The rehearsed quality of her words made it clear that this conversation had been planned as carefully as everything else. Logan nodded along with her explanation, and I realized that they had discussed how to handle my inevitable discovery, had prepared responses to my predictable questions and objections. "Does Susan know you're here tonight?" I asked. Logan's silence answered my question before Margaret spoke. "She's having dinner with the Morgans. We thought it would be better to handle this privately before involving family." The consideration for his mother's comfort while destroying my life revealed the true hierarchy of relationships in Logan's mind. I was the obstacle to be managed, not the wife whose feelings deserved consideration. The realization settled over me like cold water, washing away the last remnants of hope that this could somehow be repaired. "I want you both out of my apartment," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Margaret was already gathering her remaining belongings. "Logan's things are mostly packed. We can come back for the furniture later this week when you're at work." The efficiency of their planning struck me as almost impressive in its thoroughness. They had anticipated my reactions, prepared for my logistics, and arranged their transition with the same methodical approach Margaret applied to her consulting projects. I was simply another problem to be solved, another account to be closed out with minimal disruption to their future plans. Logan pulled on his clothes with hurried movements, avoiding eye contact as he gathered his wallet and keys. "Mia, I want you to know that this isn't about you not being enough. It's about compatibility, about building something with someone who shares the same vision for the future." His words were meant to be kind, but they felt like salt in an open wound. The implication that our 4 years together had been a mismatch rather than a betrayal somehow made the rejection more complete. I wasn't being replaced by someone better. I was being discarded as fundamentally unsuitable for the life he wanted to build. The next morning I drove to Susan's house before I could lose my nerve. The pristine colonial sat on its manicured lawn like a monument to respectability, its white picket fence and flower boxes projecting the same carefully maintained perfection that had always made me feel inadequate in comparison. Susan answered the door in her gardening clothes, her silver hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her hands stained with potting soil. The sight of her looking so ordinary, so maternal, while having orchestrated the destruction of my marriage felt surreal. "Mia, sweetheart, what a lovely surprise." Her smile was warm and genuine, as if she had no idea why I might be standing on her doorstep at 8 in the morning. I followed her into the kitchen where she had been arranging fresh orchids in a crystal vase, the same ritual I had witnessed countless times during family visits. The normalcy of the scene, the morning sunlight streaming through her window, The smell of coffee brewing, the classical music playing softly from her radio, made what I had to say feel even more devastating. "I know about Logan and Margaret," I said without preamble. Susan's hands stilled on the orchid stems, but her expression remained composed. "I see. And how are you feeling about everything?" The question was asked with the same concerned tone she might use to inquire about a minor disappointment, as if my husband's infidelity with my sister was comparable to a rained-out picnic or a cancelled vacation. Her lack of surprise confirmed that she had been fully aware of their relationship long before I discovered it. "How am I feeling?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my attempts to remain calm. "I feel betrayed. By my husband, by my sister, and by you." Susan sighed and turned to face me fully, her expression shifting to one of patient explanation. "Darling, I understand you're upset, but you must see that this outcome was inevitable. Logan and Margaret are simply better suited for each other. They share the same drive, the same ambitions. They push each other toward greater success." Her words echoed exactly what Margaret had said the night before, and I realized that even this conversation had been anticipated and prepared for. Susan had her talking points ready, her justifications polished smooth by repetition. "Margaret deserves a partner who can match her professionally," Susan continued, snipping the orchid stems with precise movements. "She's built something remarkable with her consulting firm. She needs someone who can be her equal, not someone who will hold her back." The implication that I was the type of person who held others back rather than supported their growth felt like a physical blow. Susan's assessment of my worth was delivered with the casual cruelty of someone discussing the weather, her tone suggesting that my pain was an unfortunate but necessary casualty of a larger plan. "You orchestrated this," I said. "You made this happen." Susan set down her gardening shears and looked at me with something approaching pity. "I simply created opportunities for them to recognize what was already there. Logan has always been attracted to strength and ambition. Margaret has always been the achiever in your family. I merely helped them see that they could build something extraordinary together." She reached out and touched my cheek with fingers that smelled like potting soil and expensive hand cream. "You'll find someone who appreciates your artistic temperament, sweetheart. Someone who values gentleness over ambition. Logan was never the right match for your creative soul." Her words hung in the air between us like a final verdict. I stepped back from Susan's touch, her fingers leaving invisible traces on my cheek that burned with condescension. The kitchen around us maintained its perfect order. Spotless countertops, precisely arranged orchids, classical music providing a soundtrack to my personal devastation. Everything in its proper place except my life, which had been systematically dismantled by the woman standing before me. "I need to go," I said, turning toward the door before she could offer any more wisdom about my creative temperament or suggestions for finding someone more suitable. The drive back to the apartment felt surreal. I passed the coffee shop where Logan and I had shared weekend mornings, the bookstore where we had browsed together just last month, the park where we had walked our neighbor's dog when she was out of town. Every familiar landmark now felt like evidence of a life I had been living in ignorance, moments of happiness built on foundations that had been cracking beneath my feet. Our parking space stood empty. Logan had apparently removed his car sometime during my confrontation with Susan, leaving behind only an oil stain on the concrete and the faint tire tracks of his hasty departure. I climbed the stairs to our fourth-floor apartment, keys heavy in my hand, dreading what I would find inside. The living room had been picked clean of his presence. His leather recliner was gone, along with the expensive sound system he had saved months to purchase. The bookshelf held gaps where his business texts and biographies had been removed, leaving my photography books and novels looking lonely and scattered. Even his coffee mug, the navy one with his company logo that had lived beside the kitchen sink for 2 years, had disappeared. I walked through each room cataloging the absences. His clothes were gone from our closet, though he had left behind the ties I had given him for birthdays and Christmas. The bathroom counter held only my toiletries, his electric razor and cologne bottles vanished without a trace. Our shared spaces had been surgically separated, as if 4 years of marriage could be divided with the efficiency of a business dissolution. Caroline arrived within an hour of my call, carrying a bottle of wine and a determined expression. She surveyed the apartment with the sharp eye of someone who had predicted this outcome months before I was ready to see it coming. "He took the good dishes," she observed, opening kitchen cabinets to reveal the everyday plates and bowls we had received as wedding gifts. But he left you the china your grandmother gave you. The selective removal of items felt deliberate, another small cruelty in a series of calculated wounds. Logan had taken what he could use in his new life while leaving behind anything that carried emotional weight or family significance. I was left with memories disguised as household objects, reminders of a relationship that had apparently meant more to me than to him. "What do you need from me?" Caroline asked, settling onto the couch with her wine glass and fixing me with the direct gaze that had made her such an effective crisis counselor in her day job. I looked around the apartment that no longer felt like home, at the furniture Logan had chosen and the artwork he had selected, at the life we had built together that now felt like a stage set for someone else's play. Everything here carried his preferences, his vision of what our shared life should look like. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had chosen something significant for our home, couldn't identify a single room that reflected my tastes rather than his. "I need to pack," I said. "But not for your guest room. I think I need to leave Philadelphia entirely." Caroline nodded as if she had been expecting this decision. "Where will you go?" The question caught me off guard because I hadn't thought beyond the need to escape. I walked to our living room window and looked out at the city skyline, at the lights of apartments filled with other people's lives and other people's choices. Philadelphia had been my home for 28 years, but it felt contaminated now by the systematic destruction of everything I had believed about my place in the world. "Denver," I said suddenly, the name emerging from some deep place in my consciousness. "I did a destination wedding there last year, remember? The mountains, the clean air, all those coffee shops and art galleries. Nobody there knows me as Logan's wife or Margaret's sister or Susan's inadequate daughter-in-law." Caroline raised her glass in a mock toast. "To Denver then. And to finding out who Mia really is when she's not trying to be perfect for people who don't deserve her." We spent the evening sorting through my possessions with ruthless efficiency. 4 years of shared life condensed into boxes that would fit in my car, plus a few larger items Caroline offered to store in her basement until I could arrange for professional movers. I kept my photography equipment, my books, the china from my grandmother, and clothes that felt authentically mine rather than chosen to project the image of a successful executive's wife. The hardest decisions involved items that carried mixed memories. The coffee maker we had received as a wedding gift, which had brewed thousands of cups for hurried mornings and lazy weekends. The throw pillows I had selected for our first apartment, back when Logan had still asked for my opinion on decorating choices. The photo albums filled with pictures of family gatherings where I had felt included and valued, not knowing I was actually being evaluated and found wanting. "Take what makes you happy," Caroline advised when I hesitated over a ceramic vase Logan's mother had given me for my birthday. "Leave behind anything that comes with strings attached or makes you question your worth." The vase went into the donation pile along with most of the wedding gifts from Logan's side of the family. I realized that keeping those items would mean carrying reminders of people who had never truly accepted me, who had been quietly supporting my replacement long before I knew I was being replaced. By midnight, my entire adult life in Philadelphia had been reduced to 8 boxes and 3 suitcases. The apartment looked hollow and impersonal, like a rental property between tenants. I walked through each room one final time, saying goodbye to the space where I had believed I was building a future with someone who loved me. In the bedroom, I sat at the small desk where I had edited client photos and managed my business finances. The surface was clear now except for a single piece of stationery and a pen. I had been planning to leave a long letter explaining my feelings, detailing the pain they had caused, articulating the betrayal I felt at their calculated manipulation of my life. Instead, I found myself writing just 3 words: "Watch me succeed." The simplicity of the message felt more powerful than any lengthy accusation could have been. It was both a promise to myself and a challenge to them, a declaration that their assessment of my potential would prove to be dramatically incorrect. I folded the note and left it on Logan's pillow, in the spot where his head had rested beside mine for 4 years. Caroline helped me load the final boxes into my car as dawn broke over the Philadelphia skyline. The October morning carried the crisp promise of changing seasons, and I felt something shift inside my chest as I closed the trunk on the last remnants of my old life. "You don't have to do this alone," Caroline said, hugging me beside my packed car. "I can drive out with you, help you get settled." I appreciated the offer, but something inside me needed to make this journey solo. The drive to Denver would give me 12 hours to process what had happened and begin imagining what came next. For the first time in months, I would have complete control over my environment and my choices, no one else's preferences or opinions to consider. "I'll call you every day," I promised, settling into the driver's seat and adjusting the mirrors. "And you can visit once I find a place and figure out what I'm doing with my life." The highway stretched ahead of me like a ribbon of possibility, leading away from everything familiar and toward a future I would have to create entirely from scratch. My savings account held 3 months of careful accumulation, money I had been setting aside for a vacation Logan and I had planned to take for our 5th anniversary. Now it would fund my escape and my new beginning instead. As Philadelphia disappeared in my rearview mirror, I felt the weight of 4 years of trying to be someone else's vision of the perfect wife lift from my shoulders. The woman driving toward Denver was still figuring out who she was, but she was finally free to make that discovery on her own terms. The extended stay hotel in Denver smelled of industrial cleaning products and recycled air, but the small room belonged entirely to me. I sat on the edge of the bed surrounded by hastily packed belongings and set a timer on my phone for 10 minutes. For 10 minutes I would allow myself to grieve for the marriage I thought I had, the family I thought had accepted me, the life I thought I was building. I would cry for the woman who had tried so hard to be perfect that she had forgotten who she actually was. When the timer chimed, I wiped my face with a hotel tissue and opened my laptop. Denver was a city of possibilities and I had work to do. The laptop screen glowed in the dim hotel room light as I opened another job search website, my fingers cramping from hours of typing the same information into application after application. The digital clock in the corner showed 2:17 a.m., but sleep felt impossible when my bank balance reminded me that hope was a luxury I couldn't afford much longer. 34 days had passed since I arrived in Denver with 3 months of savings and unshakable determination. The determination remained, but the savings had dwindled with alarming speed. Hotel costs, meals, gas for driving to interviews across the sprawling city, every expense chipped away at my financial cushion until I was calculating whether I could afford coffee with lunch or if water would have to suffice. The rejections had taken various forms. Some companies never responded to my applications. Others sent form letters thanking me for my interest while explaining they had chosen candidates whose qualifications better matched their needs. A few granted interviews that began promisingly before ending with polite dismissals and suggestions to keep in touch about future opportunities that we both knew would never materialize. The morning of day 35 arrived gray and drizzling, Denver's mountains obscured by low clouds that matched my mood. I had 2 interviews scheduled, one at a law firm seeking a receptionist, another at a marketing company looking for an administrative coordinator. Both positions paid less than my photography business had generated in Philadelphia, but pride was another luxury I could no longer afford. The law firm interview lasted 12 minutes. The managing partner, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a severe bun, looked over my resume with barely concealed skepticism. "Your background is quite artistic," she observed, as if creativity were a character flaw. "This position requires someone who understands the importance of precision and discretion. Photography involves a very different skill set from legal administration." I left that office feeling smaller than when I had entered, my confidence eroding with each subtle dismissal of my capabilities. The bus ride to Pinnacle Marketing Solutions took 40 minutes through Denver traffic, giving me time to practice responses to questions I anticipated about my career transition and employment gap. The marketing company occupied 3 floors of a gleaming office building downtown, its lobby decorated with award certificates and campaign posters for clients I recognized from national advertising. Other candidates sat in the waiting area, all appearing more polished and professional than my thrift store blazer and carefully repaired shoes could manage. Their designer handbags and confident postures spoke of career trajectories that had never included sleeping in extended stay hotels or choosing between groceries and gas. Jennifer from Human Resources appeared with a clipboard and an apologetic expression that made my stomach clench. "Miss Hartwell, thank you so much for coming in today. I'm afraid there's been a development regarding the administrative coordinator position." The familiar weight of another rejection settled over my shoulders before she continued speaking. I had grown accustomed to this particular dance. The polite setup, the careful explanation, the suggestion that perhaps another opportunity might arise in the future when their needs better aligned with my background. The position has been filled internally, Jennifer continued, confirming my expectations. However, Mr. Cross wondered if you might consider interviewing for a different role that just became available. Executive assistant to one of our creative directors. The salary is comparable and there might be more growth potential given your background in visual arts. The unexpected pivot caught me off guard. After weeks of rejections and closed doors, someone was offering an alternative rather than simply showing me the exit. I nodded agreement before fully processing what the position might entail, desperation overriding caution in my decision-making process. Jennifer led me through a maze of workstations and conference rooms buzzing with activity. Employees clustered around computer monitors displaying colorful graphics and marketing campaigns, their conversations filled with terminology I didn't recognize but found intriguing. The creative energy reminded me of photography studios where I had worked during college, spaces where ideas took visual form through collaborative effort. We stopped outside a corner office where papers covered every available surface. Campaign mock-ups were taped to walls alongside mood boards filled with color samples and typography examples. Coffee cups in various stages of emptiness occupied desk space between folders and notebooks, creating organized chaos that somehow felt purposeful rather than overwhelming. Nathan Cross, the man behind the desk, introduced himself, rising to shake my hand with genuine warmth. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair slightly tousled from running his fingers through it and intelligent eyes that suggested someone who noticed details others might miss. His dress shirt was wrinkled and his sleeves rolled up, giving him the appearance of someone more focused on work than appearance. "I apologize for the mess," he said, gesturing around his office with a slight smile. "We're preparing presentations for 3 major clients this week, and my previous assistant decided yesterday was an excellent time to relocate to Portland without notice." The casual way he referenced his staffing crisis made me suspect he possessed the kind of calm demeanor that remained steady during workplace emergencies. I settled into the chair across from his desk, noticing that he moved several campaign layouts to make space for our conversation rather than simply clearing everything away. "Your resume indicates a background in photography," Nathan observed, studying the document I had printed at the Hotel Business Center that morning. "What draws someone with visual arts training to marketing administration?" The question was direct but not judgmental, offering me space to explain my situation without feeling defensive about my career transition. I could have constructed a diplomatic response about seeking new challenges or exploring different industries. Instead, something about his straightforward manner encouraged honesty I hadn't expected to share. "Because rebuilding sometimes requires completely erasing the blueprint of your previous life and designing something entirely new," I heard myself say. The words surprised me with their raw honesty, revealing more about my circumstances than any prepared answer would have conveyed. For a moment, I worried that my candor had eliminated any chance of employment, that my personal struggles were inappropriate topics for a job interview. Nathan nodded thoughtfully, his expression suggesting understanding rather than concern. "I know something about fresh starts," he said simply. "Sometimes the most interesting career paths emerge from unexpected detours." His response contained no probing questions about my past or requests for details I wasn't prepared to share. Instead, he outlined the position requirements with the same matter-of-fact approach he had used to acknowledge my honesty. Long hours during campaign development periods, coordination with clients and vendors, management of schedules that changed frequently based on project demands. "The work can be demanding," he warned. "Advertising operates on tight deadlines, and creative projects rarely proceed according to original timelines. You might find yourself staying late to ensure presentations are ready for morning meetings or coordinating with team members across different time zones." The prospect of demanding work felt reassuring rather than intimidating. I needed structure and purpose to rebuild my sense of professional competence, challenges that would prove I was capable of more than my former family had believed. The salary he mentioned would cover basic living expenses while allowing me to save toward moving out of the hotel and into proper housing. "I'm not afraid of hard work," I assured him, "and I learn quickly when given clear direction." Nathan hired me that afternoon, pending reference checks and standard background verification. Walking out of Pinnacle Marketing Solutions with actual employment felt like emerging from underwater after holding my breath for too long. The drizzle had stopped while I was inside, leaving the sidewalks gleaming and the mountain peaks visible again through clearing clouds. My first weeks at the company tested every assumption I had held about my own capabilities. Nathan maintained 12-hour days as standard practice, arriving before 7 in the morning and rarely leaving before 8 at night. Client needs drove scheduling decisions, creating days that required complete flexibility and adaptation to changing priorities. I found myself coordinating conference calls with East Coast clients while simultaneously preparing presentation materials for West Coast meetings scheduled later that day. The pace demanded efficiency I hadn't known I possessed, forcing me to develop systems for managing multiple projects without losing track of important details or deadlines. "Why are you still here?" Nathan asked one evening around 9 o'clock, looking up from his computer to find me reorganizing client files according to industry categories rather than alphabetical order. His tone carried curiosity rather than criticism, as if my presence after regular hours was noteworthy but not problematic. The question made me examine my own motivations for staying late when he hadn't explicitly requested overtime work. "Because excellence requires completion, not convenience," I responded, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. The answer revealed something about my approach to work that I hadn't fully recognized before. In Philadelphia, I had often settled for adequate results when excellent ones required additional effort that might interfere with Logan's preferences or family obligations. Here, with no one else's schedule to accommodate, I discovered satisfaction in pushing projects beyond minimum requirements toward something approaching perfection. Nathan began insisting I take proper lunch breaks rather than eating sandwiches at my desk while working. He would appear at my workstation around noon with jacket in hand, announcing that we were going to explore Denver's food truck scene or try a new cafe he had discovered during weekend wandering. These excursions became unexpected bright spots in demanding workdays. Away from the office environment, Nathan revealed interests that had nothing to do with advertising campaigns or client management. He collected vintage guitars and spent weekends visiting music shops, searching for instruments with particular tonal qualities or historical significance. "Most people assume marketing is entirely about manipulation," he said one afternoon over Vietnamese sandwiches from a truck parked near the office building. "But the best campaigns tell authentic stories that connect with genuine human experiences. It's creative problem-solving disguised as commercial communication." His perspective on advertising as storytelling resonated with my photographic training, where capturing meaningful moments required understanding the emotional truth behind surface appearances. I found myself sharing tentative observations about visual composition and color psychology, ideas that emerged from years of thinking about how images communicate meaning. Nathan listened to these contributions with genuine interest, sometimes incorporating my suggestions into campaign development discussions. The experience of having my creative insights valued and implemented began healing wounds I hadn't realized were still bleeding from Susan's dismissal of my artistic capabilities. "You should consider taking some evening classes in graphic design," Nathan suggested during one of these lunch conversations. "Your eye for visual storytelling could translate well into campaign development if you're interested in expanding beyond administrative responsibilities." The suggestion planted seeds of possibility I hadn't allowed myself to consider since leaving Philadelphia. Perhaps this detour into marketing could become more than temporary employment while I rebuilt my photography business. Perhaps I could develop new skills that would create opportunities one couldn't yet imagine. These daily conversations with Nathan provided something I hadn't experienced in years: professional dialogue based on mutual respect rather than family obligation or marital duty. He never pressed for personal details about my past, but his consistent encouragement began restoring confidence that had been systematically undermined by people who claimed to love me. The work itself demanded growth that stretched capabilities I had never tested. Client presentations required organization skills beyond anything photography had taught me. Managing Nathan's schedule while coordinating with external vendors developed negotiation abilities I didn't know I possessed. Each successfully completed project built evidence of competence that contradicted everything Susan had said about my lack of ambition and drive. 3 months into employment at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, I realized I was no longer the same woman who had fled Philadelphia in heartbreak and confusion. The person emerging from this experience possessed strengths that had been dormant during 4 years of trying to be the perfect wife for someone who had never truly seen me clearly. The realization that I had become someone entirely different from the woman who had arrived in Denver 8 months earlier crystallized during a particularly challenging week in late spring. 3 major clients had requested campaign revisions on the same day. Nathan was juggling a family emergency involving his brother's divorce, and I found myself managing both the creative team's concerns and client expectations without breaking stride. "How did you know to restructure the Morrison Industries presentation that way?" Nathan asked after I had successfully navigated a tense conference call where the client had demanded significant changes to their brand messaging strategy. That pivot to focus on their sustainability initiatives instead of cost savings was exactly what they needed to hear. I looked up from the notes I had been organizing, suddenly aware that I had made strategic decisions about campaign direction without conscious deliberation. The insights had emerged naturally from months of absorbing information about client psychology, market positioning, and authentic storytelling. What had begun as administrative support had evolved into something approaching creative partnership. "I think I'm starting to understand how this business actually works," I said, feeling surprised by my own competence. That evening, Nathan suggested dinner at Bistro Vendôme, an upscale French restaurant downtown that we had walked past numerous times but never entered. The elegant atmosphere felt different from our usual casual meals at food trucks and neighborhood cafes, and I wondered if the invitation carried significance beyond celebration of our successful client management. Nathan waited until after we had ordered wine and appetizers before pulling a manila folder from his briefcase and placing it on the white tablecloth between us. The document inside appeared to be a formal business plan, complete with financial projections, market analysis, and organizational charts. "I've been developing this concept for almost 2 years," he began, his voice carrying an excitement I rarely heard during our workplace conversations. "A boutique creative agency that specializes in authentic brand storytelling for emerging companies. Clients who get overlooked by traditional agencies because they're too small or too unconventional." As I read through the proposal, I recognized ideas we had discussed during our lunch conversations, strategies that had emerged from our collaborative work on recent campaigns. The business model focused on long-term partnerships with clients who valued creative integrity over mass market appeal, companies that needed sophisticated marketing support but couldn't afford the premium rates charged by established agencies. "The financial projections look solid," I said, studying the carefully calculated startup costs and revenue expectations. "You've clearly thought through every aspect of this venture." Nathan leaned forward across the small table, his expression becoming more intense. "I want you to be my partner in this. Not as my assistant but as creative operations director. Equal ownership, shared decision-making authority, your name on the door alongside mine." The proposition caught me completely off guard. During my months at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, I had begun to recognize capabilities I hadn't known I possessed, but I had never imagined that Nathan viewed me as potential business partner material. The opportunity represented validation of my professional growth that went far beyond anything I had experienced in Philadelphia. "That's an enormous risk," I managed, my pulse quickening as I considered the implications. "Starting a business requires capital I don't have, and I'm still learning the industry fundamentals." "You understand people and systems in ways that can't be taught," Nathan replied. "You have instincts about client needs and project management that most people develop only after years of expensive mistakes. The technical knowledge can be acquired, but genuine insight and integrity are much rarer qualities." The conversation continued through dinner and into the evening as we walked through downtown Denver discussing logistics, potential challenges, and shared vision for what the agency could become. Nathan's confidence in my abilities felt both thrilling and terrifying, representing an opportunity to build something meaningful while risking the financial security I had worked so hard to establish. 2 weeks later, I gave notice at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions and signed partnership papers for Cross Hartwell Creative, named for both our contributions to the venture's development. The decision felt simultaneously rational and completely insane, but something deep inside me recognized this as the opportunity one had been unconsciously preparing for since leaving Philadelphia. Our transition from colleagues to business partners proceeded smoothly, but the emotional shift that accompanied our professional evolution surprised us both. Extended evenings spent reviewing marketing strategies gradually evolved into conversations about personal histories, career aspirations, and the unexpected paths that had brought us together. Nathan shared details about his father's expectations that he join the family law practice, and his decision to pursue marketing despite parental disappointment. I found myself cautiously revealing fragments of my own story: the photography business I had abandoned, the marriage that had ended in betrayal, the family dynamics that had driven me to seek complete reinvention in a new city. "You don't talk about your past very often," Nathan observed one evening as we worked late preparing a presentation for a sustainable clothing company. "But when you do, I get the sense that whoever you were before Denver didn't get the recognition they deserved." His gentle observation created space for me to share more than I had intended. I found myself describing my photography work, the satisfaction I had discovered in capturing meaningful moments for clients who trusted me with their most important celebrations. Nathan listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that revealed genuine interest in my creative process rather than polite curiosity. The first time he kissed me, we were standing outside our rented office space on an October evening when the first snow of the season began falling around us. We had been discussing client acquisition strategies when the conversation shifted to more personal topics, and suddenly his hand was touching my face with gentle certainty. Neither of us mentioned the kiss the following day, both concerned about complicating our fragile business partnership with romantic complications. We maintained professional boundaries during office hours, but the awareness of changed dynamics colored every interaction with new possibility and nervousness. When it happened again a week later, we could no longer pretend it was mere impulse driven by seasonal atmosphere and late-night proximity. The attraction had been building through months of shared meals, collaborative problem-solving, and gradually increasing emotional intimacy. "This could complicate everything we're building," I warned during a conversation that finally acknowledged what was happening between us. "Or it could be the foundation for something even more meaningful," Nathan replied with the same optimistic pragmatism he applied to business challenges. Our courtship developed along unconventional lines that reflected our shared priorities and mutual caution. Strategy sessions evolved into romantic dinners when we discovered restaurants that served both excellent food and quiet atmosphere conducive to discussing campaign development. Research trips to study successful brands in other markets became weekend getaways that combined professional learning with personal exploration. We maintained privacy about our relationship from clients and investors, determined to establish credibility as serious professionals before revealing the personal dimensions of our partnership. Nathan understood my need to prove that I deserved respect based on competence rather than romantic association, and his patience with my emotional walls created safe space for healing I hadn't known I needed. The process of learning to trust someone again felt like rehabilitation from an injury I hadn't recognized as serious. Nathan never demanded more information about my past than I was prepared to share, never pushed for emotional intimacy that felt premature or overwhelming. His consistent reliability in small matters built foundation for believing his promises about larger commitments. Our first major disagreement occurred 8 months into both our business partnership and romantic relationship, when a potential client requested campaign concepts that would have required compromising our commitment to authentic storytelling. Nathan wanted to decline the project immediately, while I argued for finding creative solutions that might satisfy both client needs and our principles. The argument revealed different approaches to professional ethics and risk management, but also demonstrated our ability to work through disagreements without damaging either our business or personal relationship. We developed conflict resolution strategies that strengthened rather than threatened our various partnerships. 18 months after founding Cross Hartwell Creative, we were reviewing quarterly financial projections in my apartment living room when Nathan made an observation that changed everything again. We were both wearing weekend clothes, sweatpants, and old t-shirts, surrounded by spreadsheets and budget documents that reflected our company's steady growth. "Marry me," he said suddenly, looking up from a cash flow analysis with expression of absolute certainty. The proposal was delivered without elaborate preparation or romantic staging, just authentic recognition of what we had built together and confidence in what we could create as fully committed partners. The spontaneous nature of the moment felt more meaningful than any carefully orchestrated romantic gesture could have been. "People will say we're moving too quickly," I said, though my heart had already provided its answer. "I've never been more confident about anything in my life," Nathan replied, setting aside the financial documents to focus entirely on my response. "We've already proven we can build something extraordinary together. This is just making it official." His certainty about our partnership felt both exhilarating and stabilizing, offering the security of someone who had seen me at my most vulnerable and most capable, who valued both aspects equally. The man proposing marriage in my living room wasn't seeking someone to complete him or fix his problems. He was choosing a partner who complemented his strengths while bringing unique capabilities to their shared endeavors. The conversation that followed covered practical considerations about combining our personal and professional lives more completely, but also deeper questions about the kind of partnership we wanted to create. Neither of us had interest in traditional marriage roles that might diminish our business collaboration or individual growth. "I want someone who challenges me to be better while accepting who I am right now," I said, trying to articulate what I had learned about healthy relationships through painful contrast with my previous marriage. "That's exactly what I want too," Nathan agreed, pulling me closer on the couch where we had been working. "We're already doing that for each other. Marriage would just be acknowledging what's already true." The proposal felt like natural evolution rather than dramatic change, recognition of partnership that had been developing through months of shared challenges and mutual support. This man who had seen me rebuild my life from nothing and contributed to that transformation was offering permanent alliance based on genuine knowledge of who I had become. 6 years had transformed our lives in ways I could never have imagined during those early days of uncertainty in Denver. Cross Hartwell Creative had grown from a 2-person startup operating out of my apartment to a respected agency employing 43 people across 3 offices. The acquisition by Mediavance Corporation had elevated Nathan to Chief Creative Officer of their Authenticity division, while I had assumed the role of Chief Operations Officer, overseeing our expanded portfolio of sustainable brands and socially conscious companies. Our success had provided material comforts that felt almost surreal compared to my extended-stay hotel beginnings. The house Nathan and I shared in Cherry Creek featured floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Rocky Mountains, a photography studio I had designed for weekend projects, and a kitchen where we hosted dinner parties for clients and friends who valued both professional achievement and personal authenticity. That Tuesday morning began like countless others, with Nathan reviewing industry publications over coffee while I organized my calendar for meetings with potential acquisition targets. Mediavance had tasked us with identifying innovative agencies that aligned with our commitment to meaningful brand storytelling, companies that could strengthen our expanding network of creative partnerships. "You might want to see this," Nathan said, sliding the latest issue of Marketing Today across our breakfast table. The magazine fell open to a page of industry news briefs, small headlines announcing personnel changes, merger completions and business developments. My eyes caught on a modest item near the bottom of the page. Hartwell Consulting faces closure after failed merger. The name struck me with unexpected recognition. Margaret's consulting firm, the business she had built with Logan after their marriage, was apparently dissolving under the weight of overambitious expansion and mounting debt. The brief article mentioned client departures, failed acquisition attempts, and staff reductions that had reduced the once promising company to a shell of its former ambitions. "I didn't realize you still followed news from Philadelphia," I said, attempting casualness while my heart rate increased slightly. Nathan set down his coffee and studied my expression with the careful attention he applied to reading client reactions during presentations. "I don't typically monitor East Coast business news, but Meridian Consulting Group appeared on our potential acquisition list yesterday, and the research team flagged some interesting connections." He pulled out his tablet and opened a document that contained detailed information about Meridian's client portfolio, financial performance and organizational structure. The company specialized in helping mid-sized businesses develop strategic expansion plans, exactly the type of practical consulting work that Margaret had always claimed represented serious professional contribution compared to my artistic pursuits. "Your former husband works there now," Nathan continued, his voice maintaining the neutral tone he used when discussing potentially sensitive business matters. "Logan Hartwell, Business Development Coordinator. The legal department contracts with Hartwell Consulting for regulatory compliance work." The irony of their current circumstances compared to my present situation felt almost cinematically perfect. The superior match that Susan had orchestrated, the ambitious power couple that had justified destroying my marriage, now struggled with business failure and reduced professional status while I sat in my beautiful kitchen beside a genuinely successful husband who had never questioned my worth or potential. "Will this connection affect your acquisition strategy?" I asked, maintaining the same professional tone Nathan had established. Nathan reached across the table to take my hand, his gesture conveying both business pragmatism and personal consideration. That depends entirely on your comfort level. Meridian's creative portfolio would complement our expansion objectives perfectly, but I'll withdraw from consideration immediately if their involvement causes you any distress. His willingness to sacrifice a strategically sound business decision for my emotional well-being exemplified the fundamental difference between my current partnership and my previous marriage. Logan had never demonstrated such consideration for my feelings, had never prioritized my comfort over his own advancement opportunities. "Don't be ridiculous," I replied, squeezing his hand before releasing it. "This is purely business. Personal history shouldn't influence professional decisions." The statement was accurate but incomplete. While I genuinely believed that business considerations should drive acquisition choices, I also recognized an opportunity for personal satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with demonstration. They had dismissed my potential and discarded my value. Now they would witness my achievement on my terms in my space as my guests. 3 weeks later, Mediavance completed the acquisition of Meridian Consulting Group. The integration process would require several months of careful coordination to ensure smooth transition for existing clients and staff members, including Logan, who would remain in his business development role under our corporate umbrella. "We should host a celebration gala," Nathan suggested one evening as we reviewed quarterly performance reports in his home office. "Something that commemorates the acquisition while showcasing our expanded capabilities to investors and potential clients." The suggestion aligned perfectly with our standard practice of marking significant business milestones through carefully orchestrated events that reinforced our brand identity while strengthening professional relationships. Our previous galas had been held at venues like the Denver Art Museum, spaces that reflected our commitment to creativity and authentic expression. The Contemporary Art Museum would work well, I agreed, already visualizing how we might arrange the space to accommodate both formal presentations and networking opportunities. Nathan looked up from his computer with an expression that suggested he was considering additional possibilities. "We should probably invite key stakeholders from Philadelphia as well. Representatives from Meridian's client base, associated consulting firms, people who can help ensure smooth integration of their East Coast operations." The proposal felt like destiny presenting itself in the form of standard business protocol. Including Meridian's professional network in our celebration would demonstrate Mediavance's commitment to maintaining established relationships while introducing Eastern clients to our expanded capabilities. The fact that this would require inviting Logan, Margaret, and potentially Susan was simply an unavoidable consequence of thorough stakeholder management. "That makes strategic sense," I replied, maintaining appropriate professional detachment while internally recognizing the perfect symmetry of the situation. The guest list development took several days of careful coordination with Meridian's management team to ensure we included all relevant parties. Logan's name appeared among Meridian employees who would attend as representatives of our newly acquired subsidiary. Margaret would likely accompany him as his spouse, given that such events typically included +1s for married staff members. Most surprisingly, Susan's name emerged during discussions of Philadelphia's consulting community leadership. Her involvement with several professional organizations and her influence within the city's business establishment made her inclusion both logical and unavoidable if we wanted to make meaningful connections with East Coast decision-makers. The RSVPs arrived gradually over the following weeks. Business associates and investors confirmed their attendance with brief notes expressing enthusiasm for celebrating our continued expansion. Meridian employees responded with appropriate professional courtesy, acknowledging the significance of the occasion while maintaining suitable formality. Then came the responses from my former life. Logan's acceptance arrived through standard corporate channels, his name appearing on the list of Meridian representatives who would attend to facilitate introductions between Eastern and Western client bases. Margaret's inclusion was noted as well, her RSVP indicating she would accompany him as his spouse and provide additional consulting industry perspectives. Susan's response surprised me with its personal warmth. Rather than the formal acknowledgement I had expected, she sent a handwritten note expressing genuine excitement about reconnecting after so many years and congratulating Nathan and me on our remarkable success. Her words suggested she had researched our company's growth and reputation, that she understood the significance of what we had built together. As the gala approached, I found myself paying unusual attention to details that would normally be handled by our events coordinator. The menu selection, the floral arrangements, the lighting design, the musical entertainment, every element needed to reflect both Mediavant's corporate sophistication and Cross Hartwell's creative authenticity. The dress selection became particularly significant. After visiting several boutiques, I found an elegant sapphire gown that projected exactly the right combination of professional authority and personal confidence. The color complemented my complexion while the cut suggested success without ostentation, power without intimidation. Standing before my bedroom mirror the night before the event, I realized that I was no longer preparing to confront my past or prove my worth to people who had underestimated me. The woman reflected in that mirror had already proven everything that needed proving, had built a life and career that required no external validation. Nathan appeared in the doorway, adjusting his bow tie while observing my preparations with the appreciative attention he had maintained throughout our relationship. "Ready to show Philadelphia what they missed?" he asked, though his tone suggested he understood that my motivations had evolved beyond such simple satisfaction. "Ready to celebrate what we've accomplished," I corrected, turning from the mirror to face the man who had seen my potential when I couldn't recognize it myself. "And to demonstrate the kind of partnership that creates rather than diminishes." The Contemporary Art Museum would provide the perfect backdrop for this reunion, its modern architecture and innovative exhibitions reflecting the forward-thinking approach that had defined both our business philosophy and our personal relationship. Tomorrow evening, Logan, Margaret, and Susan would enter our world as guests, witnessing firsthand the empire built on authenticity rather than manipulation, partnership rather than competition. I no longer needed their approval or acknowledgement, but I would certainly enjoy their recognition of what they had been too short-sighted to imagine possible. The transformation from discarded wife to successful executive represented more than professional achievement. It demonstrated the power of authentic partnership, the strength that emerges when someone sees your true potential and commits to helping you realize it fully. Tomorrow would provide the perfect opportunity to showcase that transformation, not as revenge, but as evidence of what becomes possible when you refuse to accept other people's limited vision of your worth. The evening arrived with crisp October air that carried the promise of early snow in the mountains. The Contemporary Art Museum had transformed into something magnificent under our events team's careful direction. Innovative lighting systems cast dynamic patterns across the modern architecture, while strategically placed installations showcased both artistic excellence and technological sophistication. Every detail reflected the values that had driven our company's success: authenticity, innovation, and respect for creative vision. Nathan and I arrived 30 minutes before the official start time to conduct final reviews with the catering staff and ensure that presentation materials were properly positioned. I wore the sapphire gown with confidence that felt entirely natural, no longer the costume of someone pretending to belong but the uniform of someone who had earned her place through demonstrated competence. "Ready for this?" Nathan asked, adjusting his tie while surveying the elegant space that would soon fill with investors, clients, and colleagues who had become genuine friends over the years. "More than ready," I replied, feeling a calm certainty that surprised me with its completeness. Guests began arriving promptly at 7 o'clock. Mediavant's executives mingled with local business leaders, while our creative team introduced portfolio highlights to potential clients who had traveled from across the region. The conversations buzzed with the energy of people who genuinely enjoyed both their work and each other's company, creating an atmosphere of celebration rather than obligation. I spotted them immediately when they entered the main gallery 20 minutes later. Susan led the way, wearing a conservative black dress that projected traditional elegance while surveying the crowd with the calculating gaze of someone assessing unfamiliar territory. Margaret and Logan followed slightly behind, both appearing uncertain as they searched for familiar faces among the assembled guests. Their pause near the entrance revealed more than they probably realized. These were people accustomed to being recognized and welcomed at social events, who typically commanded immediate attention and deference. Here they were simply 3 more guests among 200 attendees, notable only to the woman who had once lived under their judgment and found it wanting. I continued my conversation with Denver's Economic Development Director about sustainable business practices, allowing them time to orient themselves while demonstrating my comfort and authority within this environment. When they eventually approached our group, I noticed Susan's practiced smile falter momentarily as she processed the scene before her. "Mia," she said, embracing me with theatrical warmth that felt both familiar and hollow. "You look absolutely radiant. This is quite an impressive gathering." "Susan," I responded with genuine courtesy, accepting her greeting without the defensive tension that might have characterized our interaction years earlier. "Thank you for making the trip. I'm pleased you could join us for this celebration." I turned to include Nathan in the conversation, extending my hand toward him with natural ease. "This is my husband, Nathan Cross." Margaret stepped forward immediately, her smile sharp with professional calculation. "Chief Creative Officer Nathan Cross," she clarified, extending her own hand while her eyes assessed both his appearance and demeanor. "Your reputation in the industry precedes you. I've followed your company's expansion with considerable professional interest." The automatic correction revealed that Margaret had researched our backgrounds thoroughly before attending, seeking advantages or angles that might prove useful in future interactions. Her approach remained fundamentally transactional, viewing every relationship through the lens of potential benefit or strategic positioning. Nathan's response perfectly captured the essential difference between his partnership with me and the dynamic I had experienced in my previous marriage. "With respect, Mrs. Hartwell, our success represents a genuine partnership from the very beginning. Mia's operational brilliance and strategic insight transformed my creative vision into sustainable business reality." The surprise in their eyes was subtle but unmistakable. They had expected to encounter a familiar narrative: the rescued victim who had found salvation through marriage to a successful man. Instead, they witnessed something that challenged their fundamental assumptions about my capabilities and worth. This was not a woman who had been saved, but someone who had contributed equally to building something remarkable. Logan introduced himself with obvious discomfort, his posture rigid as he shook Nathan's hand. "Logan Hartwell, Business Development at Meridian Consulting." "Yes, we're quite familiar with your position," Nathan replied with professional courtesy. "Welcome to our corporate family. We're looking forward to integrating Meridian's expertise with our expanded service offerings." The words carried no malice or condescension, but they established the new reality with unmistakable clarity. The man who had abandoned me for someone supposedly superior now reported to the organizational structure I had helped create. Margaret stood beside him not as the favored sibling who had claimed her rightful prize, but as the spouse of a mid-level employee in the business empire I had built from nothing. Throughout the evening, I remained aware of their presence without allowing it to diminish my engagement with other guests. They moved through the crowd with obvious uncertainty, lacking the natural connections and established relationships that would have made networking effortless. I watched them struggle to initiate meaningful conversations while I found myself continuously approached by colleagues, clients, and community leaders who sought my input on various professional matters. Nathan's welcome address began after dinner service concluded. He spoke eloquently about authentic creativity, sustainable business practices, and the importance of building enterprises that valued substance over superficial metrics. His presentation included recognition of key team members who had contributed to our growth, with particular acknowledgement of my role in developing the operational systems that had enabled our expansion. Then came the announcement that transformed the evening's significance entirely. Nathan outlined Mediavant's acquisition of Meridian Consulting Group, explaining how the partnership would strengthen our ability to serve clients across broader geographic markets. Logan was specifically mentioned as someone who would help facilitate relationships between our Eastern and Western client bases. His name highlighted on the presentation screen while 200 attendees applauded politely. The power dynamic could not have been illustrated more clearly. The career trajectory that Susan had orchestrated as superior to my artistic pursuits had culminated in Logan becoming a supporting player in the enterprise I had co-founded. Margaret's consulting expertise, once positioned as evidence of her greater ambition and capability, now operated within the shadow of my company's acquisition strategy. Susan found me during the reception period that followed Nathan's presentation, champagne flute in hand and expression carefully composed. "I always knew you possessed remarkable potential, Mia," she stated with the confidence of someone rewriting historical narrative. "You had such untapped capabilities even during your marriage to Logan." Her attempt to claim prescient recognition of my abilities felt both pathetic and irrelevant. The woman standing before me had systematically undermined my confidence and orchestrated my marriage's destruction, yet now sought credit for capabilities she had actively discouraged. "Did you?" I asked with mild curiosity rather than accusation. I recall rather different assessments of my potential during that period. Susan waved her hand dismissively, as if previous conversations had been merely strategic motivation rather than genuine evaluation. A mother-in-law sometimes must provide challenging perspective to encourage growth. Margaret needed confidence and support. You required different forms of encouragement. Her explanation transformed deliberate cruelty into caring guidance, reframing manipulation as wisdom that I had simply been too immature to appreciate. The revisionist interpretation might have wounded me years earlier, but now it merely revealed the depth of self-deception required to maintain her sense of moral superiority. Margaret approached our conversation with Logan trailing reluctantly behind, both appearing ready to conclude their obligatory social interaction and return to more comfortable territory. "Your husband is undeniably impressive," she acknowledged with grudging respect. "The way he commands professional attention and respect. You've certainly elevated your circumstances significantly." The backhanded compliment contained familiar implications about my success being primarily reflective of my husband's achievements rather than my own contributions. Margaret remained unable to conceive of partnership that didn't involve one person diminishing the other, success that didn't require someone else's failure. "We've accomplished remarkable things together," I corrected gently. "That's the fundamental nature of authentic partnership. Each person's strengths complement and amplify the other's capabilities. Perhaps something worth considering in your own professional and personal arrangements." Margaret's expression hardened at the subtle suggestion that her own relationships might benefit from similar examination. Logan looked away entirely, unable to maintain eye contact while processing the implicit critique of their marriage and business partnership. The dynamic between them revealed strain that hadn't been visible during their confident dismantling of my previous life. They had achieved everything they claimed to want, yet something essential was missing from their apparent success. The victory they had celebrated so thoroughly had proven hollow in ways they were still discovering. Hours later, after the final guests departed and cleanup crews began restoring the museum to its normal configuration, Nathan and I sat in our kitchen sharing leftover dessert directly from the catering containers. The evening had concluded exactly as planned, with new business relationships established and existing partnerships strengthened through celebration of our continued growth. "How do you feel about tonight?" Nathan asked, studying my expression in the soft light from our pendant fixtures. "Grateful," I realized, the word emerging with surprising certainty. "Genuinely grateful for everything that brought us to this point." He raised an eyebrow with gentle curiosity. "Even the painful parts?" "Especially the painful parts," I confirmed, reaching across our granite countertop to take his hand. Standing there tonight, watching them navigate our world as guests rather than gatekeepers, I didn't feel vindicated or superior. I felt thankful that their betrayal had launched me toward something infinitely better than what I could have built while living under their limited vision of my worth. Nathan smiled with understanding that had developed through years of witnessing my gradual healing from wounds I had initially tried to hide. "That might represent the most powerful form of resolution possible. Not making them pay for their cruelty, but recognizing that their actions inadvertently created the foundation for your authentic success." As we climbed the stairs toward our bedroom, both exhausted but deeply satisfied with the evening's outcomes, I experienced a profound sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. The woman who had fled Philadelphia in heartbreak and confusion had transformed into someone capable of building genuine partnership, professional success, and personal fulfillment that required no external validation. Susan, Margaret, and Logan had witnessed that transformation without truly understanding its significance. They remained trapped within the same limiting beliefs and competitive dynamics that had driven their manipulation of my previous life. Their inability to envision authentic collaboration or recognize real potential had become their own limitation rather than my obstacle. The most satisfying aspect of the entire evening was my realization that I no longer needed their acknowledgement, approval, or understanding. I had built something remarkable with someone who valued my contributions from the beginning, who had seen possibilities in me that I was still discovering about myself. Their assessment of my worth had proven dramatically incorrect. But that mattered far less than my own recognition of capabilities that had always existed, waiting for the right environment and partnership to flourish fully. If this story of transformation and triumph had you captivated from start to finish, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Mia introduced Nathan at the gala. Watching Susan's practiced smile freeze as she realized this wasn't the broken woman she expected to find. What was your favorite moment from Mia's journey? Share it in the comments below. Don't miss more compelling stories of resilience and success. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.